The first thing I saw was my son Daniel lying beneath the harsh white lights of the emergency room, and the first thing I heard was his voice trying to convince me he was okay when every visible sign told me he wasn't. "Dad, don't do anything stupid." His words came through a swollen mouth, broken by pain and exhaustion, while his mother, Rebecca, stood beside the bed with both hands covering her face. 3 police officers had stopped Daniel on the highway 40 minutes earlier. They had claimed he was suspicious. They had claimed he resisted. They had claimed he reached toward something inside his car, but the hospital photographs told another story, and the body camera recording that Detective Laura Bennett had managed to recover told an even darker one. I stood beside my 20-year-old son's bed and felt something inside me become completely still. My name is Michael Mercer. Before I became Daniel's father, before I married Rebecca, before I built an ordinary life in a quiet town, I had spent years working in places where silence mattered more than recognition. I knew how investigations worked. I knew how evidence disappeared. I knew how people lied when they believed nobody would challenge them. But I also knew one thing, with absolute certainty. Daniel had never been violent toward anyone. He had been driving home from the garage where he worked when Sergeant Travis Cole pulled him over. Officer Ryan Maddox had approached the passenger side. Officer Eric Vale had stood behind the vehicle. Daniel had asked why he was being stopped. Then everything changed. The surviving audio recording captured Daniel saying, "My hands are right here. I'm not reaching for anything." A second later came Cole's voice. "Get out of the car." Then Daniel asked, "What did I do?" There was a pause, a struggle, a sharp impact, then silence. When Laura Bennett played the recording for me, my hands tightened around the edge of the table. She watched my face carefully. "Mike, there is something else." I looked at her. "What?" She placed another evidence bag on the table. Inside was Daniel's damaged phone. "Someone tried to erase the recording," she said. "They failed." I stared through the plastic. Why would they care about a traffic stop? Laura didn't answer immediately. She lowered her voice. "Because I don't think this was a traffic stop." That sentence followed me down the hospital corridor that night. It followed me into Daniel's room, and it followed me home before sunrise. Because if 3 officers had attacked my son for something other than a traffic violation, then the question wasn't what had happened on the highway. The question was who had ordered it. Daniel slept for almost 6 hours after the doctors stabilized him. I stayed in the chair beside his bed while Rebecca rested her head against the wall. Every few minutes a monitor beeped softly, reminding me that my son was still here. I kept replaying Laura's words. This wasn't a traffic stop, it was a message. But messages have senders, and I needed to know who had sent this one. By morning, Laura had already started pulling records. Sergeant Cole had been with the department for 11 years. Ryan Maddox had served for 6. Eric Vale had transferred into the department only 8 months earlier. On paper, they looked ordinary. Their personnel files showed commendations, traffic arrests, community events, and clean performance reviews. But Laura had found something beneath the paperwork. Cole had been the subject of 2 excessive force complaints. Both had been dismissed. Maddox had been named in a civil lawsuit that had quietly settled. Vale had previously worked in another county where an internal investigation had ended without charges. 3 men, 3 histories, 1 traffic stop. It was too neat. I asked Laura for the dash camera footage. She told me the official file was corrupted. I almost smiled. "Corrupted?" I asked. "That's what the department says." She handed me a printed report. The report claimed Daniel had attempted to grab something from beneath his driver's seat. But Daniel's own phone recording proved his hands had been visible. Then Laura found another inconsistency. The patrol car's GPS showed that Cole's vehicle had stopped approximately 3 minutes before the official dispatch timestamp. Someone had delayed the record. Why? That was the question that kept me awake. I wasn't going to confront Cole. I wasn't going to threaten Maddox. I wasn't going to give them the reaction they expected. Instead, I called an attorney named Marcus Reed, a former federal prosecutor who had helped me years earlier with a completely different matter. I gave him the facts and nothing more. Marcus listened silently. When I finished, he said, "Mike, if these officers were trying to create a false narrative, don't give them anything they can use against you." "I know. Then let the evidence speak." I looked through the hospital window at Daniel. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." 2 hours later, Daniel woke up. He looked at me and whispered, "Dad, I remember something. I leaned closer. What? His eyes moved toward the doorway before he answered. One of them knew your name. My chest tightened. Which one? Daniel swallowed. The tall one. Cole. He paused. Before they pulled me out, he said, your father should have learned when to stay buried. I stared at my son. I hadn't told him everything about my past, but someone else clearly knew enough. And suddenly the traffic stop wasn't merely an assault. It was a warning aimed at me. The next 48 hours changed the entire investigation. Marcus Reed filed preservation requests before the department could claim more files had disappeared. Laura Bennett quietly obtained records from dispatch, hospital intake, vehicle GPS, and neighboring businesses. A gas station camera had captured the patrol vehicle arriving before the official stop was recorded. Another camera showed a black SUV parked across the road. The SUV left less than 5 minutes after Daniel was taken away. Laura tracked its registration to a private security company owned by a businessman named Victor Harlan. The name meant something to me. Harlan had once competed for a government contract involving security logistics. Years earlier, his company had been investigated after an employee attempted to obtain restricted information. No charges had stuck. He had money, connections, and enough influence to make problems disappear. But why would he care about Daniel? I didn't have an answer. Then Rebecca found an old photograph in Daniel's room. It showed Daniel at a charity event 6 months earlier. Standing in the background was Victor Harlan. Daniel had never noticed him. Neither had we. Laura enlarged the image. Harlan wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking directly at Daniel. That was the first real crack in the wall. We began checking Daniel's recent activities. Nothing criminal, nothing suspicious. He worked at a garage. He attended classes. He played basketball with friends. But 2 weeks earlier, he had helped repair an old utility truck for a customer who had left without collecting it. The vehicle had contained a damaged electronic storage device hidden beneath a panel. Daniel had turned it over to the customer. He had never opened it, but someone apparently believed he had. Suddenly Cole's question made sense. Where's your father's drive? They weren't looking for something Daniel owned. They believed Daniel had access to something connected to me. The misunderstanding was almost laughable. I had no secret drive. I had no hidden files, but whoever hired those officers didn't know that. They had built an entire operation around an assumption, and assumptions are dangerous when people are willing to hurt others to prove them true. Laura called me that evening. Mike, there's more! She told me Cole had met Victor Harlan 3 times in the previous month. The meetings weren't listed in any official schedule. Surveillance from a restaurant showed them sitting together for almost 2 hours. Financial records showed payments moving from one of Harlan's companies into an account belonging to someone connected to Maddox. It wasn't enough for an arrest yet, but it was enough to explain why someone had tried to erase Daniel's recording. The deeper we looked, the larger the picture became. Then Marcus called. Mike, he said, someone is trying to access the evidence server. I felt the old instinct rise inside me. The instinct to move fast, to control the situation. But I forced myself to stay still. Can you identify them? I asked. Marcus answered, not yet. Then Laura sent me one final message. It contained a screenshot from the system logs. Someone had accessed Daniel's case file from inside the police department. The username belonged to Sergeant Travis Cole. The next morning, Cole held a press conference. He stood behind a row of microphones and claimed the officers had acted appropriately. He said Daniel had been uncooperative. He described the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding. He never mentioned the missing footage. He never mentioned the recording. He never mentioned Victor Harlan. Watching him speak, I realized what he believed. He thought the department would protect him. He thought his uniform was stronger than the evidence. He thought my family would become exhausted before the truth could catch up with him. But Daniel had already decided he wasn't going to stay silent. When Marcus asked whether he was willing to give a formal statement, Daniel nodded. Yes. His voice was weak, but steady. Rebecca squeezed his hand. I stood behind them. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. Daniel described every moment of the stop. He described Cole's questions, Maddox's movements, Vale's position, and the moment the officers changed from questioning him to controlling the situation. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't speculate. He simply told the truth. That made his statement powerful. Meanwhile, Laura found another witness. A truck driver named Samuel Ortiz had been passing the scene when Daniel was stopped. Samuel had seen two officers standing beside the patrol car while Daniel was still inside. His dash camera had captured the first 30 seconds of the encounter. That footage contradicted the police report. Daniel had not exited aggressively, he had not reached under his seat, he had not attacked anyone. The official story was collapsing. Then came the most important discovery. Samuel's camera also captured the black SUV leaving the scene. Investigators traced it to Victor Harlan's security company. Marcus immediately requested a warrant for the company's financial records. The judge approved it. Within hours, investigators discovered payments made to an intermediary connected to Cole. The money wasn't labeled as payment for intimidation, it was disguised as consulting fees. The amount matched the pattern, and one payment had been made 2 days before Daniel's traffic stop. The case was no longer about 3 officers using excessive force. It had become a conspiracy investigation. Harlan tried to leave town. Investigators stopped him at the airport. Cole was placed on administrative leave. Maddox retained an attorney. Vale suddenly became cooperative. That was when I understood. The entire operation was beginning to fracture. People who believe they are untouchable remain loyal only while they believe everyone else is protected. Once one person realizes the protection is gone, the truth starts moving quickly. Vale eventually admitted that Harlan had asked the officers to identify whether Daniel possessed information connected to his father. They had been told to frighten him. Vale claimed he never expected the encounter to become violent, but he had remained there. He had watched. He had participated. And now he was telling investigators everything because he wanted leniency. I listened to the recorded interview and felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Daniel had suffered. Rebecca had cried for days. I had spent nights wondering whether my past had somehow placed my son in danger. But the evidence was finally speaking for itself, and soon, everyone would hear it. The case went public 2 weeks later. News stations reported that 3 officers were under investigation for misconduct, falsifying reports, and conspiracy. Victor Harlan was facing federal charges. The department announced an independent review. More importantly, the judge ordered all digital evidence preserved and appointed an outside investigator to examine previous complaints involving the officers. That investigation uncovered something nobody expected. The same officers had been connected to 5 earlier traffic stops involving unusual allegations of missing evidence. None of the victims had understood the pattern. Now they did. Each case involved someone connected to information Harlan wanted. The traffic stops had been used as pressure points. Daniel had simply been the first person whose family had the resources and determination to reconstruct the entire operation. One evening, Daniel asked me why I had stayed so calm. We were sitting in the hospital cafeteria. He still had a small bandage near his eyebrow. Because I was terrified, I told him. You didn't look terrified, I smiled. That's what discipline looks like from the outside. He looked at me for several seconds. Were you really dangerous? I knew what he meant. I learned how to be dangerous a long time ago. He lowered his eyes. And now? I answered. Now I'm learning how to be your father. That conversation stayed with me, because the entire investigation had forced me to confront something I had avoided for years. My past wasn't a weapon I could simply lock away. People could still search for it. They could still use my history as leverage. But Daniel didn't need me to become the man I had been. He needed me to become the man I had promised his mother I would be. A father, a protector, someone who believed the truth could win without destroying everyone in its path. If you're enjoying this tactical justice story so far, make sure to subscribe for more daily military revenge and justice stories. The next turn in this case was about to expose something even bigger. Marcus called that night. We found the financial ledger. I asked what was inside. Everything. The ledger connected Harlan to payments made over several years. It listed dates, amounts, intermediaries, and coded descriptions. One line referred to Daniel's traffic stop, another referred to a previous victim, another listed a payment scheduled for the week after Daniel's arrest. Marcus said investigators believed the payment was intended to ensure the case disappeared, but it hadn't. The evidence had survived. The recording had survived, Daniel had survived, and now the people who believed they controlled the story were about to discover that they had never controlled it at all. They had only delayed the truth. The courtroom was packed on the day the preliminary hearing began. Daniel sat beside Rebecca. I sat behind them. Across the room, Cole avoided eye contact. Maddox kept whispering to his lawyer. Vale looked exhausted. Harlan entered last, surrounded by attorneys. He looked completely different from the man in the restaurant photograph. His confidence was gone. The judge reviewed the evidence one piece at a time. The traffic camera footage, the surviving phone recording, the GPS logs, the dispatch discrepancy, the financial records, the witness statement from Samuel Ortiz. Then the prosecutor played the audio. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom. My hands are right here, I'm not reaching for anything. Then Cole's voice. Your father should have learned when to stay buried. The courtroom went silent. Rebecca began crying. Daniel looked straight ahead. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth was finally speaking for us. Cole's attorney tried to argue that the statement had been taken out of context. The prosecutor responded with additional footage. The black SUV, the timestamps, the meetings, the financial transfers. Every explanation collapsed under another piece of evidence. Then came the moment that changed the case. Vale testified. He admitted that Harlan had instructed them to determine whether Daniel knew anything about his father's former work. He admitted Cole had told them to make Daniel afraid. He admitted the official report had been altered, and he admitted that after the incident, Cole ordered him to remove the recording from the evidence system. The judge asked why. Vale looked toward Cole. Because he said someone was paying us to make the problem disappear. Cole finally looked up. His expression had changed. He realized the case was over. Not because I had confronted him, not because anyone had threatened him. It was over because the evidence had become impossible to deny. The trial lasted months. Daniel continued recovering. Rebecca returned to work. I returned to my normal routine. But every few weeks another update arrived. Another charge. Another witness. Another former complaint reopened. Harlan's organization began collapsing. Employees cooperated. Financial accounts were frozen. Additional defendants were identified. What had started as one brutal traffic stop became the investigation that exposed an entire network. And through it all, Daniel refused to let the experience define him. He went back to college. He returned to the garage. He started teaching younger mechanics. One day he called me from campus and said, Dad, I think I'm finally okay. I sat quietly for a moment. Good, he laughed. That's it? What do you want me to say? I don't know, I smiled. Then I'll say what matters. I'm proud of you. There was silence on the phone. Then he said, Love you, Dad. I closed my eyes. Those 3 words meant more than any verdict ever could. The final verdict came on a cold Monday morning. Cole was found guilty. Maddox was convicted. Vale received a reduced sentence after cooperating with investigators. Victor Harlan was convicted on multiple federal charges. The department announced sweeping reforms. The officers' cases were reopened. Families who had previously believed nobody would listen finally had someone willing to hear them. Daniel attended the sentencing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. When Cole was led away, Daniel watched without anger. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked him how he felt. He simply said, I'm grateful the truth was heard. Then they asked me whether I had used my past connections to influence the investigation. I shook my head. No, I used lawyers, evidence, and the legal process. One reporter asked whether I wanted revenge. I looked toward Daniel. Revenge would have made this about me. Justice made it about what happened to him. That sentence spread across the news. People debated it for days. Some said I should have done more. Others said I had done exactly enough. But I knew the truth. I had spent years in a world where problems were sometimes solved quickly and quietly. Fatherhood taught me that the fastest solution isn't always the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest response is the one that survives scrutiny. Daniel's injuries healed slowly. The scar remained, but the fear disappeared. He stopped looking over his shoulder when a police car passed. He stopped flinching at sudden knocks. He stopped asking whether someone might recognize his last name. One evening, months after the verdict, we sat outside the house watching the sunset. Daniel said, Do you ever regret not doing something yourself? I thought about it. No, not even once? Not once. He nodded. Why? I looked at him, because if I had lost control, they could have taken you from me twice. He didn't understand immediately. What do you mean? The first time, they hurt you. The second time, they would have taken your father away. He stared at me, then he nodded slowly. That was the lesson. Anger can feel like strength because it moves quickly, but real strength can wait. Real strength can document. Real strength can protect the people you love without turning you into the thing you hate. Daniel eventually graduated with honors. Rebecca framed his diploma. We celebrated with a small dinner at home. No reporters, no cameras, no courtroom, just family. Daniel raised his glass and said, "To getting through the worst year of our lives." I raised mine. "To never letting it become the best story about who you are." He smiled. That was the moment I knew he had won. A year after the traffic stop, the department sent Daniel a letter. It was an apology. Not a perfect apology, not enough to erase the past, but it acknowledged what had happened and admitted that the officers had abused their authority. Daniel read it twice, then he folded it and put it away. "I'm not keeping this because I forgive them," he said. "I'm keeping it because I want to remember that they were held accountable." I understood. Forgiveness wasn't required. Closure didn't mean forgetting. Healing didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant refusing to allow those 3 men to control the rest of his life. The investigation eventually ended, but the reforms continued. New policies required stronger evidence preservation. Independent investigators reviewed serious complaints. Officers were retrained. Citizens were given clearer avenues for reporting misconduct. None of those changes could undo Daniel's injuries, but they could prevent someone else from experiencing the same thing. That mattered. One afternoon, Laura Bennett stopped by our house. She had become more than an investigator during those difficult months. She had become a friend. She brought Daniel a copy of the final investigative report. "Your case changed the department," she said. Daniel looked at the document. "I didn't want any of this." Laura nodded. "I know." I looked at her. "Neither did we." She smiled. "But you didn't waste it." After she left, Daniel sat quietly for a while. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Dad, I used to think being strong meant never being afraid." I looked at him. "And now?" He smiled. "Now I think being strong means being afraid, and still doing the right thing." I nodded. That was everything I wanted him to learn. Not how to fight, not how to intimidate, not how to become dangerous, how to remain himself when someone else tried to take that away. Years of military service had taught me how to survive danger. My son taught me something more important. He taught me why survival matters. Because when the lights of that emergency room first hit my eyes, I thought my job was to protect Daniel from the people who had hurt him. Eventually I understood that my job was bigger. I had to help him reclaim the life they had tried to steal. And he did. He went back to school. He built his career. He married a woman named Claire who loved him without caring about my past. They had a daughter. Her name was Emma. The first time I held her, Daniel stood beside me and laughed. "Grandpa," he said, "you're going soft." I looked down at Emma's tiny face. Maybe, then I looked at my son. Or maybe I finally learned what all those years of toughness were supposed to protect. He smiled, and for the first time, the memory of that traffic stop didn't feel like a wound. It felt like something we had survived. Years later, Daniel still had the scar above his eyebrow. Sometimes people asked about it. He rarely answered, not because he was ashamed, because he didn't want strangers deciding that one terrible night was the most important thing about him. He became an engineer. He opened his own workshop. He mentored young mechanics who reminded him of himself before the traffic stop. When Emma grew old enough to understand the story, Daniel told her carefully. He didn't tell her that her grandfather was dangerous. He told her that people with authority can make mistakes, and sometimes people abuse power. But truth can still win when brave people refuse to remain silent. I listened from across the room. He had learned the lesson better than I ever could have taught it. The final document from the investigation remains locked in a cabinet at my house. Not because I need to remember the officers. I barely think about them anymore. I keep it because it reminds me of something I nearly forgot. The man I was before Daniel was born believed control was everything. Control the environment, control the information, control the outcome. But being a father taught me that some things cannot be controlled. You cannot control what people choose to do. You cannot control whether someone abuses authority. You cannot control how quickly justice moves. What you can control is what you do next. I chose patience. Daniel chose courage. Rebecca chose to stand beside us. Laura chose to investigate when others wanted the matter closed. Marcus chose to follow the evidence. Samuel chose to provide his footage. Each decision mattered, none involved revenge, yet together, those decisions dismantled an operation that believed it could operate without consequences. That is what I remember now when I think about that hospital room. Not the fear, not the anger, not the faces of the officers. I remember Daniel opening his eyes and saying, "Dad, don't do anything stupid." He was asking me not to become someone else because of what had happened to him. I kept that promise, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. They tried to break my son's confidence. They failed. They tried to erase the evidence. They failed. They tried to make our family afraid of them. They failed. And when the final judgment came down, I realized something that years of military experience had never taught me. The most powerful response to corruption isn't always force. Sometimes it is truth backed by patience, courage, and evidence. Sometimes the person who appears powerless is the one who ultimately changes everything. Daniel didn't need his father to become a ghost from the past. He needed his father to stand beside him in the present. So I did. And I always will. Where are you watching from? Comment on your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the moral question. If you were in my shoes, would you have waited for the legal system to expose the officers, or would you have taken justice into your own hands? Whatever your answer, remember this. Anger can demand an immediate response, but patience can build a case that lasts. Daniel survived because he refused to let one terrible night decide the rest of his life. And sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't destruction at all. It's standing back up, telling the truth, and living a life that proves the people who tried to break you never won. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, protect the people you love, and never underestimate what the truth can accomplish.
Hi everyone, my viewer. If you enjoyed this tactical action story and want you support the channel, hit that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe and turn on all notification. Okay, so you never miss a new story release. I'd love to hear your thought. Drop a comments below and let me know your favorite part of today episode, or what kind of mission you want to see next. Must be tell me which your city and state, what your name, must be comments. I am fully try your comments will reply. You see screen video, my personal secretary typing story, laptop screen story create too much effort, add visual and data collect too many effort and deliver you best story today. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and see you in the next mission. Real now next story. Thank you. Bye bye.